Hello, everyone. We're just going to let everybody get in here real quick and then we will get started. Just a couple more minutes here. We'll let everybody get in. Like we're kind of maybe slowly evening out. Okay. Welcome everyone to our FAFSA webinar today. We're hoping we can give you some more information on the changes that are coming in the FAFSA, which will be opening at the end of this month. My name is Tammy Fuentes, and I am your Senior Director for Membership Development. And we're excited to have the Get to College program here with us to present this webinar. So let me tell you just a little bit about our presenter. Kirsten Dufort is the Director of External Training and Partnerships at Get to College. Get to College is a college access program of the Woodward Hines Educational Foundation, which is a Mississippi-based foundation that strives to help Mississippians obtain post-secondary credentials that lead to meaningful employment. Kirsten has led the foundation's FAFSA scaling efforts and created training programs for Mississippi educators to support college access for Mississippi students. She partnered in creating the curriculum, student workbook materials, and master teaching of college and career readiness course for the recently established high school graduation requirement in Mississippi of the college and career readiness class. She serves on the National College Attainment Network's FAFSA Expert Advisory Board and is published in the Foundation Review for FAFSA Scaling Work. Please welcome Kirsten Dufort.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. All right, let me get my screens all set up. All right, well, welcome. Thank you for the introduction. Excited to be here within PTK Nation. I recently hired a PTK graduate. In fact, both of my team members are PTK alums, so love all of the PTK participants here. So there is a little housekeeping that we're going to take care of before we get started. As was mentioned, the resources and things that we talk through today is as a part of Get to College. There's a lot of great resources that are out there. So Federal Student Aid is going to have the most recent of things. We are in webinar mode, and so we are so glad, friends, that you're joining us. We can't see or hear you. So the way that we are asking for you to engage with us today is to utilize the feature that you see at the bottom that says Q&A. So the Q&A feature is where we want you to put the questions that you've brought to the table today. We know there's a lot of questions around the new FAFSA, but we're going to try and address some of those today. So please use the Q&A. We've got PTK team members that will be answering those, and I will be trying to answer those as we go through each one of the sections. The chat feature that you see is if you have technical issues. So we're not going to see you today. You're not going to see each other today. You get to hang out with me for the next hour, and you get to see and hear me for a little while, but then PTK will be answering any questions you have in the Q&A. So I'm going to share with you all right off the bat here, just a reminder about the FAFSA. So the FAFSA is just an application. It is only for the free application for federal student aid. And just a reminder, the FAFSA doesn't do anything. It doesn't actually award any money. It's the colleges that award you that federal aid. And so the types of federal aid that can be awarded by the college could potentially be Pell Grant, which is $7,395 a year for the 23-24, so current academic year. We don't know what the amount for maximum Pell Grant is going to be for the 24-25 year. We will know that once the federal government determines their budget for 2024, so that will be in the spring. Also, you maybe are already getting work study. You may be getting FESOG, which is a need-based grant if the institution participates in it. You may be getting student loans. These are all types of federal aid that an institution awards to you in your financial aid package after you've completed the FAFSA. One thing to note is that it's not just institutions that use FAFSA information for federal aid. They also may use it for their own private scholarships, whether that's an external scholarship, if there's any sort of community or national scholarship that has a financial need component, they may require the FAFSA, or the colleges themselves may require the FAFSA as a part of determining financial need eligibility. So if you see any of those colleges that you're looking to transfer to that have a need component, that is what they're considering when they may require a FAFSA with that. So what we're going to go through today, I'm not going to share the PowerPoint with you. Not that I want to withhold the information. I want you all to be so knowledgeable, but there's just so much fluidity when it comes to the things that are happening with the changes of the FAFSA that we are waiting on some clarification from federal student aid. And so some of the things you're going to see today are going to be in draft form. But this website is going to be available among federal student aid's website, maybe other sites, schools that you're attending or plan to attend. But this is a really great website that we've built out that has all the things that you're going to see today in link form. So if there's changes, it links out to the current site that has those. So just wanted to put this in this space that we really want you to think through about, like, okay, if you liked what you saw, then this website has all of that all condensed for you. And they just dropped it in the chat. So y'all can all click on that, save it as a browser, come back to me, right? Come back. I want you to see the slides. Don't keep your screen up. All right, we're going to start with new language. So we all know that the 24-25 FAFSA has a lot of changes, and we need to start to make sure that we're all entering this space on the same page. All right, so I want to make sure that we all are aware of some of the language I'm going to use for the rest of the presentation, what exactly that means, and maybe what it used to be on the FAFSA that you may have done in the past. The first is contributor. So contributor is a group of individuals who need to provide their information and consent on the FAFSA. So a contributor could be the student, so you. It could be a student's spouse. It could be a parent. It could be other parent. It could be preparer. So these are all what you're going to hear moving forward as contributor, because it's now a role-based experience. We'll dig more into that in a second. SAI, this is Student Aid Index. So Student Aid Index, we're going to talk a lot about what that means with the 24-25 FAFSA, where that's changed from the expected family contribution in just a second. But you need to know SAI is Student Aid Index. Consent, this is all users identified as contributors that we just learned as required to participate in a FAFSA form will be prompted to provide consent. Consent is required in order to retrieve FTI from the IRS to calculate aid eligibility. Let's take some of those acronyms and talk about those for a second. FTI means federal tax information. IRS means the Internal Revenue Service, right? That's where taxes are filed. So what consent is going to be a very critical part for every contributor to do on their form. So you all have done a FAFSA before. You all know that you would log in with your FSA ID at studentaid.gov, right? You go to the FAFSA, you would say, start a new FAFSA or renew my FAFSA. You would select, I am the student, and then you would put your information in there. And then your parent, if you have to do parent information as a dependent student, they would, in that same browser form, put in their information, do the IRS data retrieval tool, and then you would submit that same browser form. That's no longer what the FAFSA is like. Okay, no longer is it that everybody's in that one form. It is now what is called a role-based experience. And this is why consent is so important for every contributor. See why we're doing the language now? Because of this explanation. So now you are a contributor as a student on your FAFSA. You are going to provide consent that the federal tax information from the IRS will be shared directly and automatically with federal student aid without you having to do the IRS data retrieval tool, or without you having to tell them I'm a non-tax filer, because it's going to validate that too. Okay, so you're going to do that as a contributor. It's going to give consent. You're going to have that magical rainbow of federal tax information from the IRS come over to federal student aid. Your parent, if you're dependent, is going to do that as a contributor on their separate form. So think of this as browser tabs. It's a separate browser tab that has to happen. They have a separate form. They have to give their own consent. They have to have their own username and password. No longer is that all in yours. You're going to do yours. You could do it at the same time. You could do it at completely different times. And as long as every contributor that's required gives consent for that magical rainbow to happen between the IRS and federal student aid for tax filing information or non-tax filing information, if you're not required to file, your parent is not required to file taxes, that will be all of that done. And then the colleges get it. Once every contributor has provided consent and their information, then it's going to be submitted to the colleges when all that is finished. We're going to dig a lot more of like who is parent, who's contributor, FSA ID as coming up. Just wanted to explain that language change and how it relates to the application moving forward. Family size. This is new language. Is based on the number of people claimed as exemptions on the prior year tax forms filed rather than it being a manual entry on the FAFSA form. So previously you would manually enter that. That is no longer the case. This aligns to the IRS tax code to exemptions, which is part of that magical rainbow agreement from the IRS to federal student aid, is they had to align that. So this replaced household size. If you remember on the FAFSA that you recently did for the 23-24 year, you manually put in the household size. That is no longer the case. It will ask you a question if there's a difference in the household size and what is claimed on taxes, and you can adjust that if need be, but it's going to bring that over based off of that magical rainbow. And then the last language change that we have here is FAFSA submission summary. It's the student's output document provided a summary of all the data input on the FAFSA form. This replaces the SAR. This is an important language change here, because you may be familiar with the word, the SAR, or student aid report, from your financial aid offices saying, oh, you need to check your SAR, and referencing that. They're not referencing that anymore. It doesn't exist. It is now the FAFSA submission summary. So just know that if your financial aid office is telling you check your FAFSA submission summary, that is where you log into studentaid.gov, and you're going to go into the FAFSA section, and it's going to be available there. Okay. All right, so there are 5 things that you need to know, and there's a lot within each one of those 5 when it comes to preparing for the 24-25 FAFSA. I've got the chat and the Q&A pulled up. I'm going to try and make sure I answered those. The question about what if you're married, filed joint, we're going to talk about that in a second. So we're going to get to that one. If you had a job from July through October of 23, is that reported as on the upcoming application? That question, if you did not file taxes for 2022, it's always uses prior tax year. So your job that you had from October through July through October of 23, you may report that on your 2023 taxes, which won't be applicable for the 24-25. So prior tax year, so 2 years ago. All right. That one, though, you will have to answer asset questions, which is cash savings and checking as of that day. So if you still have money in your bank account from that job, that's the only place that it would be reported. But if I do not live with my parents, lives 100 miles away, we're going to answer that when we get into digging into there. We're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about the I turned 24, provide parent info. We'll get to that one. To use parent income. So it looks like we've got a lot of questions about the account and income and family. We're going to get to that. All right. So the PTK team is kind of monitoring it. I wanted to make sure if there's anything so far. You're using the FAFSA if you have a master's degree. Starting my master's, you're going to be an independent student, FYI. So you're not going to use parent information. You also can't get Pell Grant for master's. So know that that is something. So try to scroll through here. It looks like we've kind of talked through. We're going to dig into a lot of these forms. So is the taxes that are needed for the FAFSA form for 24-25, is it 2022? Yes. It is prior year taxes. Okay. So that means that you're going to use 2022 taxes when it opens. All right. Now let's dig in a little bit more. I think we're going to address a lot of these questions. So first thing you need to know, FAFSA is not open right now for 24-25. Don't go and do it. If you do it, you're doing it for the current school year. If you need to do it for the school year, go and do that, right? But if you're waiting for the fall 24, spring 25, summer 25 FAFSA, it's not open yet. It's going to open by December 31st. That could mean that it could open tomorrow. It could mean that it opens on December 26th, December 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31 by December 31st. I will tell you this. Do not be surprised if your friend texts you and says, OMG, the FAFSA is open, go do it. And you go to do it and potentially it's not open because there's a brand new system that federal student aid has had to create. And as you all know, when you create something new, sometimes it's a little bumpy. And so they have said that they could potentially open it up, take it back down to fix any bugs or glitches, and open it back up. Okay, so I just wanted to be very transparent with you all to say that by December 31st, federal student aid says it will be open, but they acknowledge that there may be some work that has to be done. So I would say comfortably by early 2024 that it should be consistently rolling, and hopefully those updates will be at times that maybe we aren't doing the FAFSA, such as like, I don't know, 3 a.m. If you're doing the FAFSA at 3 a.m., you got to do it when you got to do it. But we're hopeful that federal student aid will take that into consideration if they have to take it down. Know that this is the only year that we're anticipating that it's delayed because of all of these huge changes that are happening both in the technology side and the form and the rules and all of that you've heard about. We anticipate this is the only year that it will be delayed. So moving forward, it should go back to the October 1 open date. So it means that 25-26 FAFSA should open on October 1st, 2024. Okay, so this should be the only year for that exception. All right, the next thing that I want to talk about is EFC versus SAI. So acronym here. Want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So let's talk about this. EFC is expected family contribution. This is the measurement of how much the student and his or her family can be expected to contribute to the cost of college and the student's education for a given award year. The major factors that factor into EFC, or expected family contribution, is household size, prior year adjusted gross income, AGI, and number in college. There's a lot of factors, but these are the larger pieces of that calculated formula. EFC's range of the unit that when you do the FAFSA for 23-24, your EFC could be anywhere between 0 and 99999. Okay. EFC is what you currently have with the 23-24 FAFSA that's live right now for the current school year. Moving forward, it doesn't exist. Okay, moving forward, that is now SAI, or as we learned earlier, Student Aid Index. For the 24-25 FAFSA and all the future FAFSAs, the unit that comes out of it that the financial aid offices will use to determine financial need, right, is the SAI. SAI measures your family's financial strength and is used to determine your eligibility for federal student aid. The number in college is not a factor in SAI calculations. Hold on with me just a second, because this is a little bit more in-depth explanation than the EFC is. So I'm gonna give you a lot more to dig into here. Now, a part of the minimum and maximum Pell calculations is SAI. Okay, so what this means is now financial aid offices have 3 steps that they have been guided to do when determining Pell eligibility and Pell award. Step number 1 is financial aid is going to look at the adjusted gross income, or the AGI, from the prior year. So we already established that's 2022. And the family size, and use the maximum Pell Grant tables, which we'll see in just a second, to see if the student qualifies for maximum Pell. Then step number 2, if they get to that step, they will use the SAI to determine Pell Grant eligibility and amount. And step number 3 is they will use the minimum Pell Grant calculations to identify if the student is eligible for minimum Pell Grant. And I'm going to show you those tables. They're still in draft mode. I'm going to show you the dependency tables. There are independent tables that are with the SAI draft, which is linked in that Get to College website that I sent to you all. They're still in draft. We're waiting for those to be finalized from federal student aid, but it gives us a good idea. We've got a couple more points here, and then I'm going to show you those tables. So hold on one second. The new SAI range is negative 1,500 to 99999. So you could have an SAI when you do the 24-25 FAFSA as a negative 350. you could have it as a negative 1,000. But only the individuals who are non-tax filers, if you're independent, or if you are a dependent and your parents for 2022 are non-tax filers because you are not required to file taxes or they are not required to file taxes, will get a negative 1,500 SAI. Those are the only ones. So non-tax filer is the only one that gets a negative 1,500. Now, you could get a negative 1,000 SAI, but if your parents filed taxes, but you won't get a negative 1,500 because they did file. All right. Now, let's dig in a little bit more to these tables that I mentioned. So we've always had maximum Pell Grant, the maximum amount that you can get as a student in Pell Grant. Now there's a minimum Pell Grant. And as I mentioned earlier, there's 3 steps. So what financial aid is going to do is for those of you who are dependent students and you have a single parent, they're going to look at these tables when they're finalized with the final numbers. Again, these are still in draft for dependent. And they're going to look at your family size. So say that you have a single parent, there's you, and you've got one younger sibling. Okay. So that would be a family size of 3. You'll see it's based off of the prior year poverty guidelines. These tables that I'm showing you are for the 48 continuous United States, not Hawaii and Alaska. Okay, so Hawaii and Alaska, you have different poverty tables, and that will be, it's listed in the draft SAI with the final SAI. So we're just looking at not Hawaii and Alaska states, okay, numbers. And so if you're not in Hawaii and Alaska, these numbers apply to you. So a family size of 3 with a single parent, you as a student and a younger sibling, you'll see that. Let's go through that line 3 and go underneath the max Pell parent AGI for prior year. So 2022's adjusted gross income. If your single parent made less than $51,818 in 2022, that amount or less, you're getting automatically max Pell, the maximum Pell Grant, which we don't know what that value is right now. 424.25. Currently, it's that $7,395 a year for the current academic year. All right. Now, if your parent made above $58,818, then you go to the next column. So then you're going to look at and say, okay, well, did they make below 74,848? And if so, you're going to be getting some sort of Pell Grant. If they made that 78,848, then you're going to get at least minimum Pell Grant. So that's where you see that there's an expanded range. So this has income range expansion, but then also there may be more of us here on this call that are going to be eligible for Pell Grant because of this expansion change. Now, this table is only for single parent dependent students. So not that you are a single parent, it is that you have a single parent. Again, if you are a single parent, then that is independent tables, and I'm not going to show those to you today, but they are in the draft SAI tables. Now, this is for a dependent student who their parent is not a single parent. And federal student aid is not going to define that anymore. So it is up to your parents to identify if they are not a single parent. Okay. Sometimes federal student aid refuses to identify and clarify things, and there's a reason behind that. And so this is one of those. It is going to remain as a not single parent. Okay. So say that we've got the 2 parents, we've got you as a student, and we've got one younger sibling. So now we're at a family size of 4. So go to that 4 line, go to the 3rd column, and we see that the maximum Pell Grant adjusted gross amount from 2022 would need to be $48,563 or less. Okay. And that is going to give you the maximum Pell Grant. Now, going to the next column, the last column there on line 4 is $76,313. So if your parents' adjusted gross income for 2022 was between 76,448 or less, so really anything less than 76,313, you're going to be getting some sort of Pell Grant. Anything less than 48,563, you're going to get maximum Pell Grant. Okay, so that's what the new SAI part of that Pell calculation, as I explained, steps 1, 2, and 3, this is a part of that. Again, these are draft. We're waiting for federal student aid to give us the finalized ones, but these give us a general idea of what this is going to look like. Okay. All right. Let me go through really quickly before we do the personal circumstance, see if there is any relevant questions here. And PTK team, if there's anything that's pressing that you want to amplify, that would be great.
Several of it you have already covered or you're going to cover since.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to move forward with the personal circumstance questions. So personal circumstance questions are what we formally refer to as dependency status questions. So if you'll remember in the 23-24 FAFSA or prior FAFSAs, if you didn't do 23-24 and you're going back to school or whatever, these are the questions that ask you and determine if you are considered an independent student for the FAFSA purposes or if you're considered a dependent student. If you were an independent student, meaning you could say yes to just one of the series of questions listed on the form, then that means you only use your information or you and your spouse's information if you're married as of the day that you complete the FAFSA. You do not provide a biological or adoptive parent information. If you are a dependent student and you go through these questions, you can't say yes to one of them, then you have to provide biological or adoptive parent information. No one else. Can't use anyone else's information other than biological or adoptive. That means that if you have lived with your grandparents since you were the age of 5, your grandparents didn't adopt you, they aren't your legal guardian, you can't use grandparent. You have to use biological or adoptive. We're going to dig into that a lot, but I just want to make sure that we understand that dependent requires biological or adoptive parent, and those are the only people that can be a parent on the FAFSA. So let's dig into these questions. A lot of them, if you've done a FAFSA before, if you're renewing, you'll see that they're the same with maybe just a little bit of tweaking of language. There's one in particular I want to highlight that's very different that we're going to talk through. But these are the dependency questions, now called personal circumstance questions, that you'll see on the 24-25 FAFSA. We're going to talk through each one of these. The first one is, were you born before January 1, 2001? So all of those questions that I saw in the chat or in the Q&A that ask them 24 or older, if you are 24 or older in the upcoming age year, so 24-25 year, you are independent, meaning you will not provide parents' information, only your information. If you are married as of that day, you'll put your spouse's information. Okay, 24 or older in the upcoming age year, you are considered independent. Next is student's current marital status. So you as a student, what is your current marital status as of that day? There's a list that will be presented on the form. Single, never married, divorced, separated, widowed, all of those are options. If you are married as of the day that you complete the FAFSA, you are independent and you must provide your spouse's information. If you are separated but not divorced, that is a different scenario there. Then you're separated. You may have to still go back to provide parent information, depending on if you're not 24 or older, have a child, all these other variables, okay? Because you were not married. But if you were married as the day you complete the FAFSA, you are independent. Next, when the student begins the 24-25 school year, what will their college grade level be? This is a list that you will choose from. It is freshman, first year, second, sophomore, junior, other, undergraduate, and then master's. If you're working on a master's degree, professional degree, such as a law degree, if you're working on your doctorate, things like that, you are independent. And you are not going to use parent information. You also can't get a Pell Grant. I saw that question earlier for a graduate program. But if you're working on a master's degree, regardless of your age there, then you are considered independent, do not provide parent information. If you're undergrad, then that is, you're still considered a dependent unless you can say yes to one of these other questions. Next, a student is currently serving as active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for the purposes other than training. Something to note here is the important wording of the active duty. So if you are in National Guard or the Reserve and you do not have active duty orders, you cannot say yes to this question. You have to have active duty orders in order to say yes here. Student is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, very self-explanatory. They have veteran status. Now, the bottom one that you see on the screen that is bolded, this has changed and why I want to talk about this a little bit more. If you've done the FAFSA before, you know that this question used to read, are you currently pregnant, essentially, and will you provide majority of the financial support? So it used to read in future tense. It now reads in current tense. So if you're joining us today on this webinar and you are currently pregnant, you cannot say yes to this question until you have your child, if it's your first child, and you they live with you, because now you can see that question reads, the student has a child or other people excluding their spouse who live with them and receive more than half of their support from the student now and between July 1, 2024 and June 30th, 2025. So not only live with them currently and receive majority of their support, but will within the upcoming year. All right. So just wanted to make sure I highlighted this change. This is something that if you are currently pregnant, make sure you pay attention to any financial aid deadlines that you have, but you may want to consider the timing of when you complete your FAFSA here. All right, so there's another page of these questions that I wanted to make sure we go through. At any time since you turned 13, anytime since the student turned 13, they were an orphaned, no biological or adoptive parent. At any time since the student turned 13, they were a ward of the court. At any time since the student turned 13, they were in foster care. So it's important to pay attention to the fact that the word since the student turned 13 means that's their 13th birthday. Okay, so if you have had any of these scenarios since your 13th birthday, even if you're joining us and you're 22, you can say yes to any one of these, even if you were adopted when you were 14. But if both your parents have been deceased since you were 13 and you're 22, you can still say yes to this if you haven't been adopted before your 13th birthday. If you were adopted after your parents were still deceased there since 13. So that's something to think about. If you're a question that we get actually quite often around this one exactly is if only one parent is listed on your birth certificate and that one parent is deceased since 13th birthday, then that means that your legal parent is deceased and you would be independent. Now, if your other parent is listed on your birth certificate and they are still living, then you need to go get that parent's information for the FAFSA. All right. Moving down our list, the student is or was legally emancipated as determined by a court in state of legal residence. Very self-explanatory there. Student is or was in a legal guardianship with someone other than their parent, your parent or step-parent as determined by a court in state of legal residence. Every word that is on the FAFSA is very important to pay attention to, and this is one of the prime examples of that. Note that it is legal guardianship and not legal custody. I literally today went to Student Aid's website and they have explaining, and it says in the paper FAFSA, which for 24-25 what we're going off of, it says, do not select yes to this if you are in a legal custody. Custody and guardianship is not the same thing. Legal guardianship terminates parental rights. Custody is temporary. So if you're in a legal custody with somebody and you go back to your biological parent, they get parental rights back. But if it's guardianship, you go back to your biological parents, they don't have parental rights. Okay, so it is important to note that if you're selected for verification and you select this, you may have to show court papers that show the wording of guardianship. Okay. And then the last one, anytime on or after July 1, 2023, was a student accompanied and either one, homeless, or two, self-support at risk of being homeless. This may be if you came out of high school and McKinney-Vento documentation. If you have had this lived experience since then, and you can say yes to this, you may just have to get an individual who is an advisor or knows your personal circumstances to write a letter on your behalf of that. When you select that on the form, it drops down and says who can say that this is an example for you. All right. So it looks like we've got most of our questions have been answered for this as we went through. So we're going to continue to roll. And now that we've determined if you are a dependent student based off of those personal circumstances and we're not able to, you're not independent, so you have to use parent or biological information, then we need to determine who is parent on the FAFSA. So if you're a dependent student and parents are married to one another, if your biological or adoptive parents are married to each other, you have to use both parents' information, even if they filed taxes separately. Okay. If your biological parents are married to each other, you have to use both of their information, even if they filed 2022 taxes as married filed separate. Okay. Next. Whose parents' information to use on the FAFSA? There are 2 points here if your biological parents are not married to each other. Let's talk about each one of these. Point number 1, If your biological parents are divorced or separated, invite the parent who provided the most financial support over the past 12 months to be the contributor. This is different. So this means that if you did your FAFSA last year and your parents are divorced and they're still divorced, if you lived with mom during the week and dad every other weekend when you were in high school and you did your FAFSA, the rule used to be, who do you live with the most in the past 12 months is whose information do you use. That's not the same as it is now. And we don't want to assume that that's the same. It could be. It could be that the parent that you live with the majority of the time is the one that financially supports you the most over the past 12 months. But hear me out. What if this is your situation? You're in college. You come home for a couple of months a year. You live with mom when you do that, right? But dad pays your tuition, pays your meal plan, gives you a monthly amount, pays your car insurance, pays your car note. On the months that you live with mom, when you're home from break, does the amount of the expenses of mom over the amount that your dad is paying for you the rest of the year? That's a conversation to be had between your parents to determine who then is the parent that provides the most financial support in the last 12 months. So this may mean you're going to use someone different on your 24-25 FAFSA than you did for 23-24. Okay. And this is probably for those that are joining us today, the 263 of y'all, there's probably a lot of y'all that are sitting being like, but wait, Kirsten, wait, what? Yeah, this is something that you just need to talk to your parent about and just say, who has financially supported me the most in the past 12 months? And then y'all determine that. And then that's a parent whose financial information needs to be provided on the 24-25 FAFSA. May not mean it's different. Maybe it's different. Okay. Now, point number 2. If you do not receive financial support from either parent, identify the parent who most recently provided the most financial support and invite them to be a contributor. So let me give you 2 scenarios really quickly on this one. If you're joining me today and you're like, yeah, I haven't lived with my parents for 5 years, but I'm not independent. And now you're telling me I have to use parent information. I don't know which parent to use. My parents are divorced. You need to go and see who last provided you financial support, and that's the parent that you need to use on your FAFSA, okay? If you're sitting there and you're like, okay, well, I haven't lived with my parents since I was 5 years old. My grandparents have raised me. I'm now living at college or on my own, but I now have to know I can't use my grandparents' information. I have to use biological or adoptive parent. It means that the parent that last provided support to either you or your grandparents whose information you'd have to use here, okay? Now, you see the bold at the bottom, and I know some of y'all are going to be shaking your heads at me. I can't see you, but I know it's happening because it happens all the time. If the parent you identified in the above scenarios is remarried as of that day you do the FAFSA, their current spouse must also provide their financial information as a contributor, regardless on how they filed their 2022 taxes. Okay, so we have to include step parents' information if they are married as of the day that you do your FAFSA. Okay. Now, I'm a very visual person. So for those visual that are with us today, I wanted to provide this flow chart with you. This is actually a part of the FAFSA, not in visual form. It's a feature that you may have heard of in your research about the new FAFSA. It's called the Parent Wizard. And so it will ask you these questions in yes or no format, and then it will help you in the form determine which is your parent. But you need to know this early because we're going to talk about FSA ID soon. And you need to know that conversation needs to happen today before the FAFSA opens, so you can ensure everyone is ready to log in and be a contributor very quickly once the form opens. So that's why we're talking about it today, but it is going to be in the form itself. Just know that. So let's talk through this flow chart. It's first starting in the top left where it asks us, are your parents married to each other? If yes, then you're going to report both parents' information on the FAFSA. If no, then you need to answer, do your parents live together? If yes, you have to provide both parents' information. So if both biological parents live together, regardless of their marital status, you have to provide both information. Now, if your biological parents are not married and do not live together, then you would then go to our very last on the top right, where it says, which parent provided more financial support in the last 12 months? Identify who that individual is, and then answer, is this parent remarried? If yes, then we go down to the middle and it says, report both parent and step parent information. If no, then we go down to the right and we only report that parent information. All right, see the question that came through, if they're married but widowed, so we would, if remarried but widowed, so then we would go to our chart here, right? And it would say, is this parent remarried? But is that parent married as of that day? No, they would choose widowed and it would only be their financial information, okay? All right, so utilizing this flow chart, it's important to know some tips when you're working on figuring out who is your parent on the form. As a reminder, it does not matter who claimed you. Never once did I ask who claimed you on your taxes. That's not a factor. Doesn't matter who claims you on their taxes. It always is who is the parent that provided the most financial support that makes, if you're a dependent student. In the independent questions, it doesn't matter. If you claimed yourself, it only matters if you can say yes to one of those personal circumstance questions, okay? Next, you have to invite parent or parents as contributors, even if you do not live with your parents. Next, never use anyone's information other than a parent ever. Never use grandparent, foster parent, aunt, uncle, sibling, widowed step parent. Those individuals are never considered a parent on the FAFSA unless they have legally adopted you, okay? Next, if your parents are married to each other, if they're divorced, separated, or never married, but they live together, you have to invite both parents as a contributor. And lastly, if your parents are divorced within the last year and they filed taxes jointly, you should use only the portion of the parent with whom provided the most financial support. And the FAFSA is a smart form, so it will actually have you do the wizard. And they will ask your parents' marital status, and that will be an option of single, never married, divorced, separated, widowed. And then based off of that information and the date provided, it will give you the option to do a manual entry, which will allow for your parent on their contributor section to only put in their income information from prior year versus pulling the full tax return that may have their X included there, okay? Okay, I see that we've kind of cleared out a lot of the questions. So I see applying for FAFSA fall 2024, use your 2022 taxes. Parents are married and live together, but only my father files. You'll have to provide both parent information. If your mom does not file taxes, mom still has to use consent because it validates that mom did not file taxes. So actually both of them would have to have FSA IDs, which we'll talk about in just a second. And both of them would individually go in on their own with their FSA ID and give consent. One for your dad to file to bring his tax info, and one for your mom to validate that she did not file. If we, it's popping. If we have a household where we have a single parent but an older sibling who has a younger child, does that apply for a family of 4? So there are now the rules for who is in the family is aligned to the federal IRS tax code. So we don't have time for me to read that to you because it's pretty lengthy, but you need to look up the tax code exemption. So what's going to come over is that it's going to be aligned to what's on the tax exemptions there. So that's a more lengthy answer than what I can provide to you. You can email me and I can share that with you. Is child support provided most financial support? So Maria, you've got to figure that out. You've got to look and say, okay, well, you know, this is how much it costs for rent for my mom. This is how much utilities cost. This is how all of these things cost. Does that amount for the last 12 months exceed the amount that your other parent has provided? And is that only child support, or did that other parent provide other things for you? So that's a question to be had. All right, I see some FSA IDs and Social Security questions coming through, but that's where we're going next. All right, so let's move into FSA ID. So FSA ID, you all probably know this, but again, I make sure we're all in the same room at the same knowledge space. FSA ID is a username and password unique to every individual to sign and submit a FAFSA, to log into studentaid.gov, to do any sort of loan information, things like that. If you already have an FSA ID as a student, you will continue to use that same FSA ID. If your parent already has an FSA ID, maybe from last year's FAFSA, from an older sibling, from them themselves being a student, they're going to continue to use that same FSA ID. Okay. Now, something that's new is all FSA IDs, new or existing, will have to have a verified email address. So when you created it last year, this was the first time for you to do it, and you skipped the email and only verified your cell phone, you're going to have to go back now and add email. Okay, because there's going to be important information triggers when it comes to this user experience of individual contributor consent that requires there to be an email a part of it. You still have that multi-factor authentication, which is when you log into the FAFSA, it doesn't let you get anywhere into the actual application until you send that two-factor authentication code either through email or text or the Authenticator app. So know that that's still a factor to get in. Then your contributor will also have it because they're logging in on their own each time that they log into the form. So all FSA IDs for individuals with social security numbers must be created and confirmed before you can give consent in the FAFSA. So this takes at least 3 days before you log in. So if you in the past would make your FSA ID or your parents' FSA ID immediately and log in, this is big for those that now have more contributors than just one parent who already had an FSA ID. So if you're thinking, okay, cool, Kirsten, I'm going to plan for early January while I'm home on holiday break for my mom and my stepdad and I to all sit down and do it at the same time. Awesome. Love that. Hope that that works really well. For it to be successful, though, you need to make sure that that step parent who's never been on your FAFSA before, and if they filed taxes separately, already has an FSA ID. You could create it in that space and they could log in, but they couldn't do anything else. They can't give consent unless that FSA ID, if they have a social security number, is validated by the Social Security Administration, which takes up to 3 days. So I'm going to show you things that we're going to talk through who needs FSA ID. So you need to take away that today, as you go home or you're home during holiday break, you need to work on getting those FSA ID for contributors set up. Okay. And then the last thing, all contributors have to have an FSA ID. So let's talk about who are all contributors. Again, very visual. So hopefully this helps us as we're trying to figure that out. If you are an independent student, you have to have one as a student in FSA ID. If you are married as of the day you complete the FAFSA and you filed your 2022 taxes separately from your spouse needs an FSA ID. If you did married filed joint, then you only need your FSA ID because you're only pulling one tax return. But if you did married filed separate, or you're single or had a household because you weren't married at that time, anything other than married filed joint and you're married as of the day you do your FAFSA, your spouse needs an FSA ID because they have to give consent for that FTI information to occur for them. Okay. All right. Next, for dependent students that are with us, you as a student need an FSA ID. Now, your parent and or spouse or step parent may need an FSA ID as well. Let's talk through those 4 arrows underneath because these are kind of every scenario that I've tried to come up with that could cover who needs an FSA ID. Now that we know the whose parent information, now we need to identify, okay, which parent needs FSA IDs. So if your parents are married as of the day you do the FAFSA and their 2022 tax filing status is married filed joint, only one parent or step parent needs an FSA ID because you're only pulling one tax return over. So if you've identified mom is who provides the most financial support in the last 12 months and mom has been remarried for the past 10 years, then they filed their taxes jointly, then only mom needs that FSA ID, like maybe last year's was, because it's only one tax return that's coming over. Okay, only one consent is needed. Now, so it gets a little bit more complicated after that first bullet. All right, bullet arrow number 2. If the parents are married or remarried and 2022 tax filing status is anything other than married filed joint, both parent and step parent have to have FSA IDs. So this is where you got to go and talk to a parent and say, okay, well, what was your 2022 tax filing status? Was it anything other than married filed joint? Then everybody needs an FSA ID. Because that means that we're going to have that consent approval to occur for you as a student for FTI, for your parent 1 as FTI, and your parent 2 as FTI because it's separate taxes. Okay. Next bullet, if your parents never married but live under the same roof, both parents have to have FSA IDs because they have their own tax return that have to be given consent for that FTI rainbow to occur. Okay. And then the last bullet, if your parents are married or remarried or never married and live together, and one or both did not file 2022 taxes, like we heard in the question on the Q&A earlier, both parent, step-parent need FSA IDs. Because as we now learned, non-tax filers have to have FSA IDs because it validates that they did not file and were not required to file taxes. So no longer do you have to complete a 4506T tax form. This magical rainbow will take care of that for you, but it requires everyone, even if both parents did not file taxes and they are married and they live together, they both have to have FSA IDs because it has to validate that. So the only scenario that only one parent FSA ID is if they had prior year taxes as married filed joint and they are married as of that day. Every other scenario, everybody needs an FSA ID of who needs to be on the form. Okay, now let's dig into a brand new process that we are all learning about. This is for individuals without a social security number as parent. Now, as student, if you do not have a social security number, if you are not an eligible non-citizen with an alien registration number in the green card process, or you are not a U.S. citizen, you are still not eligible for federal student aid. Okay, you still do not do a FAFSA. All right, your state may have aid for you, your institution may have aid for you, but you cannot receive federal aid. When we're talking about individuals without social security numbers, we're talking about parents. So this is a new process that will be open at some point in December when the FAFSA opens. And it eliminates the signature page. So if you've done a FAFSA in the past and your parents are undocumented and you have submitted it via a signature page, that's no longer an option. Now it requires every parent to have an FSA ID. We're going to go through what this looks like because it's a brand new process that will be live sometime soon by the time the new FAFSA opens. So you can see on the screen here, this is a screenshot of the login page of creating an FSA ID. You can see at the bottom, the green circle shows us that there will be a new option that selects, I do not have a social security number. When that's clicked, this pop-up will show that the access to the limited to create for without a social security number is only for parents who do not have a social security number for an eligible citizen or eligible non-citizen, or if you are a citizen of a freely associated state to do a FAFSA. So if you're a student from a freely associated state, then you'll have to use the same process to create an FSA ID. Other than that, those are the only individuals that can use this process. If your parent does not have a social security number, they have to include a mailing address because it's part of the identity verification process. Next, they're going to indicate their communication preferred, as with those with socials. The same series of questions are going to occur in those challenge questions. So everybody answers this, everybody confirms the information that is presented on the creation. It's still the same process. Everybody, regardless of social security number status, they will have to do that email verification, or if you put your cell phone number, it's text verification. It's the Authenticator app. It's where you put that 6-digit code in and it links it to your account. You get the backup code, which can be used to troubleshoot retrieving a username and password in the future. And then this is where, for individuals with social security number, it stops. And it sends it to Social Security Administration. It takes up 3 days for that validation. For those parents without a social security number, this is the new set of questions that they'll see. This is an example set because it's unique to them. So it's knowledge-based questions provided by TransUnion based off of past information of that individual, okay? And so you can see the examples that are presented here. This is from Federal Student. It asks about previous address, previous phone number, where they've owned property, where they've worked. There will be 4 questions. They, to our knowledge, will have 1 attempt to answer those correctly. Okay. We expect to get more clarification as a community from Federal Student Aid around this process. There's a lot of questions here. It's a lot of unknown. So we're sharing what we have currently, but be on the lookout from Federal Student Aid to see if there's any more information that comes, which we are anticipating it to come within the next few weeks here. Now, If they answer that question, those question series successfully, it says your identity has been verified. And actually, this parent could go in immediately and give consent because they went through that TransUnion identity verification question set. But if you're like, but wait, Kirsten, what if they can't answer that question set correctly? Let me show you what that looks like. They get a screen here that says call to confirm your identity. You'll see that red exclamation point at the top. The next slide set here is the steps that Federal Student Aid has shared for those individual parents without Social Security numbers that can't answer those TransUnion questions. They need to contact FISAC. They have to call that phone number. Then a customer service representative will look up their account and initiate the identity verification process. Then they will receive an email with a case number and instructions for providing the proper documentation to verify their identity. Then they have to submit the required documentation, which we'll talk about in a second below. And then within 1 to 3 days, FSA will provide an email confirming that their identity has been verified. Now, the documentation that they have to submit is they have to complete an attestation form, which is available on studentaid.gov. And then they have to provide proof of identity, which can be done either by providing one of the following: a driver's license, a state or city identification card or foreign passport that's not expired, or a utility bill in their name, and one of the following identifications: municipal identification card, community ID, or consular identification card. Federal Student Aid has said there's a lot of questions around this. I'm sure y'all have questions if this is a scenario that resonates with you or your student population that you're working with. There more is coming, hopefully, from Federal Student Aid when it comes around this. So this is what we have known from a webinar that they presented on November the 2nd around this. Again, my name is Kirsten Dufour. I'm a Director of External Training and Partnerships with Get to College. Here's my email address. I know that there's a lot of scenarios. Every time I do FAFSA training, which is a lot, there's always a lot of personal scenarios that you have questions about. Feel free to email me. I'll try and work through those with you. But the website that they have shared throughout the presentation today at the gettocollege.org/FAFSA federal-aid has like really all of this information kind of compiled in one spot that hopefully you can use as a great resource. So I'm going to see if there's any questions that are remaining that haven't been answered. Should us as a student fill out the FAFSA first or our parents? So Shelby, that's a really good question. Let me tell you the way that it's going to work is that whoever is the last one in it is the one that actually hits submit. So if you start it first and you invite your parent within the form as a contributor, they'll immediately get an email that will say, hey, you've been asked to be a part of Shelby's FAFSA as a contributor, accept this. And you have 45 days to do that before it's deactivated. So know that if you don't log in within 45 days to check the status of your contributors, if you're a dependent student, it will erase your section. But if you log in 40 days, it resets the clock, okay? And so then your parent will go in. Well, if you've done your section and it takes your parent like a day or so to do theirs, you'll hit complete, but it will be in limbo. Essentially, think about like a circle loading until your contributor goes in. And if your contributor as a parent is the last one, and it's just one of them, then they will have the submit button. But you'll have to log back into studentaid.gov to see what your estimated Pell eligibility could be, which you're usually seeing on that confirmation page, okay? If you are the student that your parent starts it, and then you log in and you're the last one, you actually get the submit button and you get more details on your confirmation page. The reason is that security piece. IRS said, we can't share this information for someone who's not the individual that's the primary applicant. So you as a student, so your parent's not going to see SAI. Your parent's not going to see Pell eligibility unless they are with you and you log into your studentaid.gov account and you look in that FAFSA submission summary. So Shelby, it's honestly, whoever can get it done and in whatever time frame that can get completed, because it's not a completed FAFSA until every contributor has gone and provided consent and their information. So it just depends on your personal circumstances as to which is better, if it's to start as student or as parent. Will the parent FSA ID account creation go live on December 1st, the same as FAFSA? So Ricardo, currently, if your parent has a Social Security number, that FSA ID creation is live. They can use it immediately. They can go today, like right now, and create it. If they do not have a Social Security number, we have been told it's going to open in December. my guess, it will open the same day that the FAFSA opens. So that is just a big question mark, but it has to be open in order for an undocumented parent without social to give consent and be a contributor. So I would imagine it aligns around the same time frame. And then to clarify, parents have to file FAFSA and students also have to file FAFSA separately. Correct? It is a role-based experience. Everybody has their own that they go in individually and they give consent to the IRS individually. And with the new FAFSA, will they be checking if we are accurately reporting financial assets? So with the FAFSA, just as it always has been on that agree to terms page, which is the very last, you are agreeing and understanding that everything you put in here is truthful and accurate as of the day. And you are, if you're falsifying information and that has been caught through verification or whatever method that the school may be using, then you are subject to thousands of dollars in fines and or imprisonment. So know that you are agreeing to a federal form, every contributor is, and that falsification could result in pretty substantial consequences there. Okay. I think I got one or two more. Apologies for missing. I heard that you are married and you have already been separated, but you filed jointly. Does soon-to-be ex need to have an FSA ID? No, you would only use your information if you are separated as of the day you file the FAFSA. You would need to only put, you would have to use the manual path, if you will. So you would have to have your taxes in front of you and you would have to extract out only your portion of your joint return. We've already talked about student or parent, depends. Consent part is not open. No, it is not open yet. It will open when the 24-25 FAFSA opens. So that is a second page of the FAFSA. There is a resource called the FAFSA prototype that I encourage if you're interested in seeing what it looks like. You can Google FAFSA prototype and it is kind of like a walkthrough of what that form is going to look like. Does FAFSA have filing deadlines? So Mohammed, it depends. It depends on your institution. It depends on scholarships. So technically the FAFSA was open for a really long time, but it all depends on those individual entities that use the FAFSA. So unfortunately, it depends. All right, Tammy, I can keep answering questions, or if you want me to stop, I can do that. It's totally up to you.
I would say let's stop. And again, if you didn't have your question answered, we have her email address in the chat. I might ask Paige to post that one more time for us down there. So if you have specific questions that you need answers to, please feel free to email Kirsten. And we thank you, Kirsten, for taking the time to share all of this information with us. Again, we will be getting this presentation out to everyone probably early next week. So thank you again.